But the scares continue. But the fear proceeds to rise. This is the Venom month of horrors 2, Trapped in Time.
We all know the story of The Silence of the Lambs and its impact on cinema. But believe it or not, that film wasn't the first to feature the iconic serial killer Hannibal Lecter. That feat actually belongs to today's film, 1986's Manhunter, which always sounded like the name of a gay bar to me.
Oh yes, I love it here at Manhunter. You move it, man!
Take my word for it.
The film follows Will Graham, played by William Peterson, a former FBI profiler with the unique and conveniently useful ability to predict the future, see everything that happened in the past, and all by simply talking to himself. Okay, there's a little bit more to it than that.
Good for him.
He has a unique skill to empathise with the serial killers he investigates, allowing him to predict their motives and patterns in order to crack the case. He's brought on by his old boss Jack Crawford, played by Dennis Farina, to investigate a new serial killer nicknamed the Tooth Fairy. No, seriously.
I've heard officers referring to this killer as the Tooth Fairy.
I was just disappointed to find out it wasn't played by The Rock.
If you can't look anymore, I understand.
And is forced to turn to another serial killer he had previously caught to solve the case. Dr. Hannibal Lecter, played this time by Brian Cox. It's kinda like what they did in real life with Ted Bundy and Gary Ridgway. Meanwhile, the actual Tooth Fairy, played by Tom Noonan, falls in love with a blind woman, played by Sean Archer's wife from Face Off, while simultaneously planning his next kill, and a deadly cat and mouse game between hero and villain is on. Like its successor, the film was also based on a novel by Thomas Harris, but the book was titled Red Dragon. However, producer Dino De Laurentiis had the title changed after his previous movie Year of the Dragon bombed at the box office, and he didn't want this to suffer the same fate. Yes, I'm sure it was because of the title, Dino. Furthermore, Bruce Lee was making a lot of films with dragon in the title at the time, and De Laurentiis didn't want people to assume that this was a martial arts film.
I'll keep him as far away from it as I can.
However, director Michael Mann hated the change, calling it inferior to the original, and even Brian Cox labelled it bland and cheesy.
I think you've already decided and you're not really asking.
Before Mann came on board, David Lynch was the first choice to direct, but he turned the job down, finding the material too violent and unpleasant. Wait till you see the next one.
I don't think that's a very good idea.
The part of Will Graham was first offered to Kevin Kline, but he also turned it down due to the dark nature of the script. And other actors considered included Richard Gere, Mel Gibson, Jeff Bridges, Don Johnson, Mickey Rourke, Harrison Ford, and Paul Newman, before William Peterson landed the role following his performance in To Live and Die in LA. Peterson researched with real FBI agents to prepare for the part, and after a while he found that he couldn't shake the character out of his system, even after filming it wrapped. He ended up having to cut his beard and dye his hair blonde in order to look at a different face in the mirror.
It's gotta stop.
For the role of Hannibal Lecter, Timothy Dalton was originally selected, but he was forced to drop out due to being cast as James Bond. And Bruce Dern, Mandy Patinkin, William Friedkin, Brian Dennehy, and John Lithgow were all considered before Brian Cox jumped on board. Cox based his performance on Scottish serial killer Peter Manuel, who didn't have a sense of right and wrong, as well as his own teenage son after the director instructed him to play the role like a British public schoolboy who wanted to murder and eat a bunch of people.
God no!
Filming began in the summer of 1985, and Tom Noonan actually requested to not meet any of his co-stars until they filmed their scenes together, so as to build genuine tension, and this resulted in many people on set legitimately being afraid of him. Noonan had initially prepared for the role by researching real-life serial killers, but he was repulsed by what he saw. Instead, he decided to play his character as though he felt like he was doing right by his victims, and he wasn't doing them any harm. Furthermore, when filming the climactic shootout at the end, most of the makeup team had already left the production due to time constraints, leaving what was left of the crew to improvise in order to get the scene finished. I mean, you can't really tell, it's a decent climax, just don't compare it to the next film and you'll appreciate it a whole lot more.
What is that about?
Ketchup bottles blown through hoses were used to simulate gunshot wounds, whilst the impact of bullets were created by the director lobbing glass jars across the set. In addition, the blood used for his leg wound was made from corn syrup, and Tom Noonan had laid in it for so long he actually became stuck to the floor.
How do I know?
They were even so screwed for money at points that there's a scene where Graham falls asleep on a plane and traumatizes a little girl who notices some crime scene photographs. This was actually sneakily shot on a real flight in mid-air because they just couldn't afford to do it otherwise.
Very interesting.
Manhunter was released on August 15th, 1986, and despite De Laurentiis' best efforts, it bombed hard, only making $8.6 million on a budget of $15 million.
Not much.
Reviews were mixed, with many criticising Peterson's performance and the over-stylized visuals. However, following the success of Silence and its sequels, the movie began to increase in popularity and gained a huge cult following. In particular, the movie's use of forensic science and criminal investigations, which was rarely done on screen at the time, ended up being a major influence on a number of films and TV shows. In 2002, a remake of the film was released, actually called Red Dragon this time, with Anthony Hopkins returning as Hannibal and Edward Norton playing Will Graham. And though a bigger commercial hit, many felt like it didn't live up to the original adaptation. I mean, you can certainly tell it's got De Laurentiis' name on it. He produced some of the early Halloween films, and the opening has that influence written all over it. The shots, the music, it all looks and sounds very similar. But the score does build up the tension really well. Except the opening title looks cheap as shit. It looks as if someone just rushed it on Movie Maker as quickly as possible with the shittiest Comic Sans font they could find. The use of music throughout the film is really clever because it's very rarely used, and when it is, it's so subtle you don't even notice. It keeps from distracting you, so you really focus on what is being said in the scene. Tiny moments of Graham just going up a lift is somehow tense because of the subtle score in the background gradually building up. The movie just has a genuinely creepy atmosphere to match it. It's unique and sounds very different, and it adds an eerie aura to the picture. There are moments where the music does build up and it hits hard, but it's utilised perfectly, so it really hits home when it needs to. It's cool to learn about the serial killer they're hunting down, who is apparently a werewolf who only hunts on a full moon.
This guy's on a lunar cycle. I have 3 weeks and a few days until the next full moon.
Weird. It's very different to Silence of the Lambs. It's more of a psychological crime drama rather than a straightforward thriller. A lot of it is Graham trying to figure out the case, but we don't actually see it. It leaves it more to our imaginations. It's interesting to see him analysing every piece of evidence and trying to get inside the mind of the serial killer that we've not even been introduced to yet. You can definitely see how this influenced later movies. And the thing is, you can already tell that it's taking its toll on his mental health. He calls up his wife and you can see that he's already regretting getting back involved in the case.
But after my body got okay, I still had his thoughts going around in my head.
And it leads to some really emotional moments as he gets completely caught up in the murder.
You son of a bitch, you touched her with your bare hands, and then you put your gloves back on. But while your gloves were off, did you open all their eyes so that they could see you?
With a lot of the film, you shouldn't and can't compare it to Silence, or you will be disappointed. They're adapting similar material, but this one takes a completely different approach. Brian Cox as Hannibal Lecter is pretty damn good. He actually comes across as just a normal guy, which in a way makes him even more terrifying as a serial killer.
Thought you might be curious to see if you're smarter than the person I'm looking for. Then by implication, you think you're smarter than me since you caught me.
No. I know that I'm not smarter than you.
Then how did you catch me, Will?
You had disadvantages.
What disadvantages?
You're insane.
The reason you caught me, Will, is you're just alike. You want the scent? Smell yourself.
Even if he is able to easily manipulate a telephone operator to get someone's home address in seconds.
3680 DeSoto Highway, Captiva, Florida.
Hope they got fired. Here's a clever game of cat and mouse as they try to break the case without Hannibal finding out, but you can never tell if he's already aware and if he is messing with them as well. It constantly keeps you guessing. It's a nice change for it to be more of a psychological drama, but I think it is a bit too long. A lot of it is breaking down the case, but at points it drags and it isn't that engaging for me. It could have been trimmed down to 90 minutes quite easily, but it does make up for it with some quite funny lines.
What you moving in slow motion for, man? I'm being mugged!
I also have no idea how they make someone called the Tooth Fairy scary, but they totally do. He's wearing tights on his face too, and he's terrifying! And the performance is insane. unlike some.
Ma'am, I think you should come back inside.
What's going on?
Come back inside,
So
please.
what's
I think you should come back inside.
Even when he's not in his creepy getup, he looks like a weird motherfucker. The relationship with the blind woman is strangely kinda sweet. There's a mesmerizing scene where she bonds with a tiger, taking her back to a childhood memory. It's sweet, but also really entrancing. It's interesting to watch this serial killer attempt to be normal around a girl he likes.
If our boy imitates being wanted and desired enough times, he believes he will become one who is wanted and desired and accepted.
And obviously dubbed. They even give some social commentary on how serial killers are formed, and it is really interesting and so well written.
This started from an abused kid, a battered infant. There's something terrible about...
Were you sympathizing with this guy?
Absolutely.
Before one of the most unnerving sex scenes you will ever see. You can even see he's not completely comfortable with it either. It's just disturbing. Graham discussing the case and talking to himself also kind of works as an adaptation of the book too. Due to the change of medium, him talking out loud kind of works as him reciting his character's inner monologue, which is quite clever. The film has a lot of weird but mesmerizing imagery, but it works for the style. The climax is so creepy as he uses music to torment the blind woman, and thanks to this film, this is now all I think of when I hear this damn song. Credit to the actress though, she nails this performance, and it couldn't have been easy, pretending she can't see the actor who's right there, but he can't even bring himself to kill her. It's quite a human character. I will say I don't love the movie as much as a lot of other people do. It's interesting and has a lot of great stuff in it, and you can definitely see the influence it had, but it does drag a bit for me as well. I'd say it's good, not great, and it should have just been shortened down a bit. Don't go in expecting Silence of the Lambs, and you'll probably enjoy it a hell of a lot more. Yes guys, I liked it this time, alright? Forgive me?